all of that. Okay, so any questions, any comments before we go home? Please, and then.
Earlier this week, I was asked, how can someone prepare to take a proper?
How what?
How can someone be prepared to take a 2-hour?
Well, in my days, I would try to cheat. I don't know what you guys do. It depends how seriously you take your classes. It depends on how seriously you take your future. It also depends to what extent you try to please the people who are closest to you, namely your parents. I have a niece and a nephew. My sister used to be a pharmacist. My brother-in-law, her husband, is a dentist. My sister used to help at the car wash. Her husband used to sell ice cream in a truck. Andrew, hello. And so for us immigrants, the only way you can define success is by going to school. And culturally, because of literature, poetry, art, money has a good amount of value, but it doesn't make you a decent human being. It doesn't fetch much respect. So education for us is a huge deal. And because of that, it was imposed on their kids from a very, very young age. Take your school very, very seriously. So when they were trying to do grad school, one is 23, the other is 22. When they had exams, they would sit and study for like 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. And it's crazy. I mean, why would a 20-year-old want to sit and study that much? That's just the way they are. So it really depends on a lot of different things. If it's a class you don't really care for, and it doesn't really matter to you that much, like econ or stats, find a way to just, without getting caught. If it's, on the other hand, it's life-threatening, like philosophy, and then you may want to invest some time and energy and focus and all that. And it's difficult being focused these days because one of the things that happen in cultures where time moves really, really fast and you have lots of options, you really lose the ability to be focused on any one thing for too long. The maximum amount of time you can be focused on anything is really maybe 5 minutes, And so it's either a good amount of fear that you must have inside you or a good amount of love. Even I don't think those things will do much for you, but they're not bad. Yeah. How old are you? Plagiarize. What class is it?
10:30.
Plagiarize. I mean, unless you're going to the medical field, are you? Plagiarize. Take the class online and let your friends take the test. By the way, I do teach ethics. Just in case you're interested. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful. But remove any distraction if you possibly can. Anything? Yes.
Yeah, from Tuesday, you had a Persian story that you wanted to share regarding my question about who was condemned, but we didn't have time, so you said you were condemned.
Well, it really has. The story has nothing to do with drugs. Sorry to have disappointed you. But let's see if there are any other questions, and then if not, I'll tell you a story. Anyone? Aaron,
Is there such a thing as lack of emotion?
lack of motive?
Emotions.
Oh, lack of emotions?
Yes.
I don't really know, but let me just try to wing it for a moment. I had a friend some years ago. She was from Afghanistan. It's neighbor to Iran and Iraq and those places. When she was very, very young, something had happened to her. She had a relatively difficult time with her uncle. He used her in certain ways. She was 11. Then she came here, and of course she tried to talk to her parents about the incidents, but they didn't believe her. She came to America, I don't know what age. She landed in, I think, New York or Washington somewhere. By then, she had lost the ability to trust anyone and to have faith in anyone or to be able to love anyone. For her, it was all about power. And she got a lot of power in a couple of ways. First, she was very, very, very attractive. Second, she went to school and became a doctor. So she had power in two different directions. First, she could lure men because of the way she looked. And especially from the Middle East, being a doctor is a huge deal. And being a woman and being a doctor is a huge deal. But one thing she realized early on is that don't put too much trust and too much faith and too much emotions into any relationship because people can betray you, as her uncle did. And so from that point on, she wasn't able to love anyone. She liked them, she didn't love them. Right? So it's not that you will never feel anything, it's just that you will not feel anything intensely. You'll take 2 steps forward and 5 back. She got married at the age of, I think, 27, and she was hoping that this marriage would save her, that she will eventually grow to love her husband, something that was stolen from her at a very young age. It didn't last. 5 years later, they divorced. One day, as I think she was working in Highland Hospital, she went to do a surgery, and this intern had just arrived from Los Angeles. He was Persian. She looks at him and something about her says, be cautious. She called her supervisor and said, I can't do the surgery today. She didn't want to be around this man. She had felt something that she hadn't felt for many, 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 many decades. Then accidentally one day as she was doing surgery, this man walks in. And she tried to walk away from him, but she couldn't. She was in the middle of this procedure. She fell in love with him within maybe 5-6 days. Okay. And of course he left, went back home to Los Angeles, and she once again found herself in complete poverty. She was angry, she lost weight, she got depressed. And from that point on again, she realized that it's just not a good thing to trust people. But sometimes these kinds of passions, which you call this particular kind of love, it's in the Persian language we call jazabe. Jazabe means it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you are, it doesn't really matter what your past is or has been. Once in a while, life has a tendency of playing these cruel tricks on you. Whatever gems or jewels or gifts you have on the inside, but you repressed because you didn't want to share for whatever the reasons are, life comes down, just pulls them out of you and shoves them in your face and says, see, you can still love. Go love. And there is no training behind it. You don't really have much experience. You've tried most of your life to repress it, and you've done a great job. But once in a while, it just is pulled out of you, and you have no choice but to be consumed by it and to be toyed by it. And then it just leaves you. And then you sit back and say, what the hell just happened? Okay. So sometimes, despite what life has done to us, we have these moments. Then there are those moments in life where you find yourself completely depressed for a variety of different reasons. You know, some people are temperamentally just depressed. Some people have certain experiences that push them into depression. You can have depression for about 10 minutes, 10 hours, or 10 years. So as their life shelf expands, it becomes more and more chronic. And by the time depression gets into this chronic stage, it's just everywhere in your life. It doesn't really matter. And it doesn't mean you're not going to have good days. You are, but you know what the background is like. You know, that depression will just pop its head out at any time. In depression, you have intense feelings because you're profoundly open. You have a lot of trigger points inside you. A lot of things just push you without you wanting to push you. You have a lot of negative emotions, but you can't form any positive emotions. It frightens you. And by the time you have chronic depression, the truth is you become addicted to a certain category of emotions. It's very difficult to pull yourself out. So it's not that you can't feel, you know. The only way you can't feel anything is when you're dead. And that's what the Stoics told us about death. Why do people fear death? I mean, some of them didn't believe in a soul, some of them didn't believe in an afterlife, God. And so they argue that once you die, you just go to the ground and that's it. So there is no reason to fear it because there is no feeling there. So that's the only way you can have zero feeling, is when you're dead. But until that point comes, you're going to have a lot of feelings and emotions, but mostly negative. And rightly so. I think healthy people have about 80% negative emotions and about 20% positive. Because that's just the way life is. Life is difficult, it's complex, it's frustrating. You try, you struggle, you fail, you try, you struggle, you fail. And all of us in this class desire to be happy, to be successful, to be relatively well defined and valued by other people, including ourselves. These are just difficult things to accomplish. Hello. So, there is also this other aspect of, I suppose, absence of emotions. When the movie The Matrix first came out, for me it was amazing. I had been teaching for a while. I knew the world of astrology, mythology, philosophy, religion, and so I found the movie to be very just fantastic. And so I put that movie on for my students, semester after semester after semester and after semester. And once in a while, as I was sitting in the classroom and watched the movie with them, I realized that as the semesters are passing and I'm watching this movie more and more often, and sometimes I would teach 10 classes a semester, okay? I realized that when I sit back and I watch Keanu Reeves and I watch Carrie-Anne Moss, I just have no feelings about the movie anymore. I've been saturated. Sometimes you walk into certain areas of life, initially they're very, very exciting, but as you become more and more exposed to the same experience, you lose the ability to feel. If I was to put a dry napkin in this, it's probably going to soak up some of my tea. But as you put the same napkin in the cup again, you see the water dripping. It's been saturated. It can no longer soak up anything. So when you're exposed to the same thing over and over and over again, it's very difficult to soak up anything. You have some people like Socrates, you have some people like Malcolm X, you have some people like Jesus in the Gospel of Judas, for example, if you're interested in those things, that they walk into life, they find life to be relatively exciting. Exciting in the sense that they fall in love with wisdom, they go look for it, they find it, whatever that may look like, and they have this fantasy inside their head that now that I have found this wonderful thing, why don't I go back into society and give it to my parents, my siblings, my friends? And then you do. You talk about the stuff, and it takes a while because you have wisdom inside your head, lots of emotions. It takes a while for all that stuff to come down into language. You have to practice talking over and over and over again so that your language could be refined enough. And if you're familiar with this logician, mathematician, Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the wonderful things that he did was that, first of all, he was very, very depressed, suicidal. Russell, the English philosopher, helped him not to commit suicide, but not to come out of depression. One of the things that he had argued is that the problem with us human beings is that we have all these feelings, we have all these emotions, we have all these thoughts, and we are enslaved by them. It's not the white man or the black man or the blue man or the yellow man. None of those things hold us hostage. It's just our own emotions hold us hostage. And then we try to express them through language. And we realize we fumble all over the place. I mean, imagine that you want to express something to the closest people in your life. And emotions are initially very raw. It's like in this class, you raise your hand and you ask a question, and you feel as if you have it all formulated in your head. Then you put in the language, and it just doesn't make any sense. Aaron, can you repeat that again and again and again? And then after a while, you say, you know what, I give up. And you realize that you're being held hostage by your emotions, by the realization that whatever it is that you're feeling and thinking can't fit words. And you have to do this over and over and over again until, magically, one day you wake up and you open your mouth and you realize things come out really well. Okay. So these folks go out, find something, they come back, and after many tries, they realize now they have a very refined way of communicating their wisdom to other people. Then they come to some grim conclusions. First, people are not interested, perhaps. Second, even if they are interested, it doesn't really mean anything. A third, they've heard their own voice on a daily basis. They're tired of it. And so when someone says, do you want life or do you want death? They say, listen, I'm saturated. I've been in life. I've done the sex for a couple of days, not interesting. I got the marriage, not interesting. I got the kids, not interesting. I went to Costco, bought some TVs, not interesting. I bought my cars, not interesting. I have friends, I wrote books, I watched movies. They're no longer interesting. I'm ready to go. Now this is, I suppose, the absence of feeling, but it comes after many years of intensely feeling about things, only to realize what you really wanted can't be accomplished down here. So you just kind of move through life like a zombie. And then you pray that someone may enter into your life and kind of sit on you so you could die in peace. If that makes any sense. But you're not there yet, so you have another like 60 years to go. Good luck with the suffering. Any, Amaya? Anyone else? Before we, yeah.
Do you believe that motivation is like integral to like pursuing some ambition, or do you think that it's kind of a necessary thing to have?
Well, I think as human beings, we are engaged animals in the sense that you wake up in the morning and you say, okay, how am I going to spend my day? It can be meaningful, it can be meaningless. Those things don't really matter. But the very fact that you wake up in the morning, you're motivated. And dreams and hopes motivate you. The desire to please your parents motivate you. The desire to please yourself motivate you. The desire to please your companion. I mean, there are lots of things out there that inspire us to do A, B, C, D. I remember I used to play tennis on the courts for maybe 5-6 hours a day. And once in a while, like anything else in life, you walk on the court and you realize you just can't play today. For some strange reason, the gods of tennis have abandoned you. So I had this picture of Bjorn Borg in the jacket of my tennis racket. And I had assumed that, and he was my idol. There was just something magical about Bjorn Borg, at least for me. So I would, without anyone seeing and noticing, I would go, take this picture out of the jacket, look at it, and say, Borg, not Yahweh, not Allah, not Jesus, Borg, please inspire me, you know. And then I would go back to the baseline and try to hit some balls, hopefully, you know, in a way that would be pleasing to me. But that oftentimes didn't help. But the point I'm trying to make, you can't survive life without being motivated by something. If you have no motivation, it's quite dark. It can be dark in there, you know, and it can be quite lonely and depressing. I was going to tell you a story, but I forgot. So, yeah. Woody Allen made a movie some years ago. I know some of you may not like Woody Allen, but that's besides the point, really. He made a movie some years ago. It's called Whatever Works. And Woody Allen is, you could say, a pseudo-existentialist. And for those of you who may not know what existentialism is, it's been around for a long, long time. I suppose as long as we were able to sit back and reflect about our position in life. Not so much the desire to find food or shelter or clothing, but really, what am I doing here? What's my goal? What's my purpose? Now, you can be an existentialist on an individual level. You can be an existentialist on a massive level. And of course, World Wars I and II didn't really help the matters very much because for the longest time in our history, we believed in human decency, human goodness, human potential, kindness, and all those things. And one of the things you find with the advent of technology and the evolution of weapons is that within minutes you can kill millions of people, okay? And you have a lot of different forces joining hands. And now when you walk around town, you realize life really has no meaning. You know, religion used to have meaning, it no longer does. Parents used to have meaning, that no longer does. The culture, tradition, rituals that used to have meaning, those things are completely gone. And now you walk around saying, what am I doing here? What's my purpose? That makes you an existentialist. And it found momentum around early 19th century or so, going back to someone like Kierkegaard, which is 18th century. But, so Woody Allen is an infant existentialist, okay? Whatever Works is a movie about human life is a desert. It has nothing to offer you. And even if it does offer you some wonderful things, it's like milk. 2 weeks later, it's expired. It doesn't give you pleasure anymore. In fact, it suffocates you, okay? And so what you have in this movie is, listen, human beings are in a very, very difficult position in life. If you can find anything that can inspire, motivate you, pursue it. Pornography is a really, really good way. Not addiction to pornography, but sometimes you sit and you realize my life is just boring. It has nothing in it. And out of desperation, you know, you try to inject some spice in your life, and before you know it, you're addicted, and before you know it, you're seeking therapy for... Anyways. So, anyone else? Are we good? Whatever Works. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good movie. Yeah.
How do you prepare yourself to take the driving exam?
You have a car? Well, you first need a car. Then you need someone who knows how to drive, because you don't really want to pay for these driving classes. Just find someone in this class, give them $10, you know. And then find a vacant parking lot. Just drive. And then find someone who has a Tesla where the car self-parks, which is really not allowed when you take the test. Just practice, man. That's practice over and over again. And make sure you can park well. And look over your shoulders when you change lanes. Turn the blinkers on. I mean, you're lucky, you're very young. These are easy things to learn. My father just took the test a couple months ago. He had failed like 50 times. He's 90. He eventually faked him a license. It looks very legit. Olivia? Anything? I'm sorry?
Your socks are blue.
They are. Yeah, it was dark. I couldn't see. That's it? Matthew?
Having children taught you anything new about life or give you perspective?
Children?
Yeah,
What kind of children?
your children.
Oh, my children. No.
You recommend having kids?
No.
Or no?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there are some things you need to consider. First, if you're not creative temperamentally, if you don't really have a lifelong goal, the idea of going to work and sitting in a cubicle and punching in data and then coming home, that's not a life. And in this culture, you'll probably become a drunk and you'll get depressed, and then you'll end your life. Okay. Children, in as much as they create a mess in your life, they distract you. And they civilize you. They civilize you in the sense that as individuals in this country, you are quite frivolous with all sorts of things. You're like a prodigal son. You go out there and you waste a whole host of things. Children force you into becoming future-oriented. You become a social and political animal in the sense that you begin to, for example, at certain points, just when you have kids, what kind of friends you want to have. Let's just say you used to smoke all the time, and somehow the presence of children, their innocence, their naivete impact you in a profound way. And then they force you to stop smoking or stop watching porn. And you come to realize that if, for example, you and your companion need to be loud in your disagreements, now in the presence of your children, you kind of turn the volume down a little bit. And these are things that kids, hopefully, if you happen to be mindful enough and aware enough, will kind of allow you to do. And then you think twice about doing certain things that could jeopardize the health of your relationship with your companion as well as your children. You also become a social animal in the sense that there comes a point where your kids need to go to school. And it's not something you've ever been interested in, but now you go on Google and you begin to research some schools. And then you look at the stats, the numbers, the negatives and the positives, and you realize that 90%, 95% of public schools in Oakland just suck. Okay. Now, you didn't care for money, you didn't care for education, but all of a sudden you do. And then you sit with your wife and say, what the hell is this? Now, you consider Oakland to be your home. You're born here, raised here, seasoned by Oakland. and now you consider moving to some dump. By dump, I mean to a place that is like a village, population 600. I had a colleague, David Long. He used to teach philosophy at Sac State, and he lived in the city. When he had his kids, Alexis and something, Roberta was his wife, Helen, he said, I don't want to raise my kids in the city. I don't want them to see concrete buildings on a daily basis. I don't want them to see traffic on a daily basis. We're going to go to Georgetown. And when I went to visit him in Georgetown the first time, population 400. One coffee shop, one Chinese restaurant, one grocery store, and one mechanic shop. That's it. And everybody knew everybody. Right. Now, city life is wonderful. It brings about a good amount of comfort. Sure, a good amount of mess as well, but it's comfortable. You walk around the lake and you see all these people. There are coffee shops everywhere, various forms of entertainment. You will never be bored in a city. Georgetown, population 400, all you see trees and nothing else. If you don't have the proper temperament, it can kill you, okay? And all of a sudden, the moment you have children, you say, okay, well, I don't want to live in Oakland. Well, where do you want to go? Well, maybe you want to go Walnut Creek, okay? But the problem with Walnut Creek is that it's expensive. It's great schools. It's a rich town, but it's expensive. But you realize you haven't spoken to your father for a number of years, and you also know that he has some money. And because of your children, something happens to you. You humble yourself, you become a beggar. And even though if your father has wronged you, you summon up the will to forgive him. Or maybe you just go to him and you guys have a chat. You say, listen, you know you have grandkids now. And you take him to your father, he melts. And he says, well, I live in Oakland. And your father says, yuck. And he begins to throw up. And then he throws in your face some cash. He says, once you guys move to Walnut Creek, you know, you can go to school, your wife can go to work if she wants to, and we'll take care of the kids once in a while. Okay. Kids do something really, really amazing, which is they take you out of yourself. In a culture such as this, where close to 70% of people suffer from, say, depression, depression makes you profoundly selfish. You're very self-involved. You're very self-consumed. Okay? Kids force you out of yourself. I got needs, man. I don't really care what happened 50 years ago in your life. You know, I don't care if you don't have any money. Find some money, steal some money, rob a bank. I don't really care. I want a toy. I want to go to Disneyland. You begin to look at your neighborhood. Maybe you live in a place where people just use bad language. Maybe they have music that you don't like. The problem, so these are the positives that, you know, the negatives is that they take everything. Your life, as you know it, will be on pause from now until they leave your house. And by the time they leave your house, you have nothing left. Your gas tank is empty. Now, if you have zero goals in life and just wandering around, having children is great. If on the other hand you do have goals, like you want to be a writer, or you want to be a thinker, or you want to be an artist, or you want to be a hiker. I don't know if you're familiar with this man named Alex Honnold. He's a climber. And he did El Capitan, you know, with no ropes, nothing. Amazing. And as you sit and watch this guy, you know, climb this, it's a 20-minute documentary or maybe 40 minutes. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And as the audience sitting back, you know, watching, you say, is this guy nuts? So what he didn't realize is that while he was climbing this flat wall, Yosemite, his girlfriend was sitting in the van and she was crying. Okay. Some months later, she got pregnant. And then she gave birth. He doesn't do anything dangerous anymore. If he had not climbed El Capitan, if he still had unfinished business with climbing, I am sure he would resent his girlfriend, he would resent himself, he would resent the kid every time they got in the way of him climbing. If, on the other hand, he had walked into the relationship relatively satisfied, in other words, you're done with school, you're not really that ambitious about becoming, like having a PhD or a master's, you're okay with sitting in your cubicle and getting paid like $60,000 a year. You're satisfied with that. You're satisfied with living in a house that's about maybe 1,200 square feet. You're satisfied. If you're satisfied, if you don't have very many unfinished business in life, is it true that the kids will frustrate you, anger you violently sometimes? Absolutely. But at least you walk into the frustration and anger relatively civilized. But they do take everything. There is also this thing about age, when you want to have children. You can have kids when you're 20, you're not really ready in this day and age. You can have kids without having parents or grandparents, uncles and aunts. That's also impossible. We have neighbors, they pay about $6,000, $7,000 babysitting alone. So if you don't have money, just having this fantasy, I love children, you're just stupid. Okay. Children are like hurricanes. They turn everything upside down. And you need to be young enough to handle the hurricane they create. Because what you do for the first 10, 15, 20 years of their life, you're going to pick up after them. They're going to make everything a mess. And you have to look at your kids like the prodigal son. Whatever you give them, they will have zero appreciation. Zero. Zero appreciation of your money, of your time, of your youth, of your energy. And you need to understand that. So they're going to be losers. All kids are. There's no exemption. They can be great in school, but they will suck in relationships because you need a different set of skills for that. So children will suck for a long time. If you are lucky, before you're dead, hopefully like around 35, 40, if you have kids that, like when you're like 10, your kids will come back to you and say, Dad, I've come to realize, or Mom, how complicated life is. By the way, thank you for all the things you gave me. When I was a kid, I got slapped by my father a few times. And man, when I think back, beautiful. And whenever, my father and I sit and we go back in time, I talk about those moments where he hit me. I deserved it. And he cared enough to hit me. Not to say, well, here's a TV, So there are lots of things that you don't really understand when you're a kid. Time really needs to pass. I don't know if the story is true, but Van Damme, you know who Van Damme is? He used to be really attractive when he was young. Now he's yuck. Anyways, he's been married like 7 times, if the stories are true. His 7th wife is his first wife. So when he got married to this woman the first time, he said, no, this is no go to divorce. He went through number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then one day, she calls and says, hey, Van, how you doing? And she says, damn. And they go out, have coffee, they get married. They're still together. So there are lots of ups and downs you have to go through until you come to realize what the past was given you is really valuable. It takes time. You shouldn't have children. Just wait, you're done with school. Once your intellect grows a little, you're able to think better about things, then you can choose the right companion. Not so much how she or he looks, where they've been, what they've learned, if they have education, if they have money, if they have a job, if they have a car, if they have a house, if they have parents. If you find any cracks in those foundations, you're taking a chance. And given that human beings desire stability, you don't want to take foolish chances. It's just too costly. Yeah. So, my apologies to those of you in this class who have children. I'm sorry for you.
That's why I was going wrong with.
Yeah, there is no solution. Yeah. Begin. Yeah, I don't have any either. Kendra?
Needs to be.
Such a difficult thing to wrestle with. You know, you fall in love with someone, you find yourself under the same roof, you guys cook together, clean together, you do all sorts of things together, and it's wonderful for the most part. And then all of a sudden things erupt. The relationship is no longer manageable. One person leaves, and the other remains devastated. And in devastation, the assumption is, I'm never going to change. I'm always going to be sad and sorrowful. It's like this frozen sea of ice. But time does something very interesting, which is you will slowly forget. And life will go back to normal. You'll go out, you'll date. Once in a while, you know, you think back and you say, you know, so-and-so, we had a great relationship. But for the most part, you're in a different place in life. So almost everything that touch us, eventually we forget. The thing that remains with you is pain. Now, if the pain happens to be intense enough, and if it is incurable, it's something that you won't forget. My father-in-law had cancer. He went to the doctor and she said, listen, just do A, B, C, D. You'll be fine. But he was from a different culture, a different tradition. He said, no, I'm just going to drink like juice and it'll go away. He got sicker and sicker and sicker to the point where you would no longer see him smile. You would no longer see him talk. He was bedridden. He had stage 4 and he was in pain all the time. And all these awful liquids were coming out of his belly button. Okay. And you could say that cancer had become immortal, eternal for him. It would never go away. Okay. And it's a very strange thing in the sense that if you have a cold or the flu, you're bedridden for a couple of days, and while in the bed, you appreciate the fact that someone is making you soup, taking care of this, taking care of that. You're given a good amount of comfort. And you appreciate what they're doing for you, you're also a little embarrassed or ashamed because you're giving them so much trouble. But then you become better, you wash dishes, you mop the floor, but then you forget. Okay? And you realize the only way that anything can become memorable, eternal, is pain. But a pain that doesn't go away. And I say that because, and you teach this particular tale to your students, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Okay, what you have in the Epic of Gilgamesh is a man who has a good amount of power in life. He has good looks, he has money, and he goes around and throws his weight. And he's cruel. And it's not that he doesn't see old people. It doesn't mean that he doesn't see sick people. It just never happens to him. And though, from time to time, I suppose, he feels the pangs of grief that, man, I too will get old, I too will get sick, I too will die. He's not very serious. He can be serious because the pain hasn't yet found a good home inside him. Okay? Most of us are hosts to pain for maybe a day, maybe a minute. Okay? And even if there is pain, we try to push it away. Some people like Malcolm, like Gandhi, like Jesus, like Socrates, whatever pain lives inside them, they want more of it. درد بر من ریز و درمانم مکن چون که درد تو ز درمان خوشتر است. That I experienced this pain, and then I sat by my desk and I wrote this long poem about pain. And then pain went away and I became foolish again. And slowly I came to realize that every time I have pain and this pain hits my soul, I write poetry, I create music, I sit somewhere, I begin to think, I begin to read, and I begin to feel the things I read. I've come to realize I want more of that pain. So please give me more pain. Despite the burden it imposes, it makes me creative, it makes me come to life. So some people, like Gilgamesh, they go through all sorts of things in their life and then they fall in love. But they don't fall in love with a Brad Pitt or an Angelina Jolie. They don't fall in love with the face. It's kind of like the story that you have in one of the dialogues of Plato, where someone knocks on Socrates' doors and says, listen, there is this new guy who entered our town. Man, he is so hot. He's a great looking guy. He's got like six pack. He's got like chiseled face and this and that. And Socrates says, okay. Well, let's go take a look at him to see if his soul is as beautiful as his body. And he goes there, he has a conversation with him, and he comes away saying, he is a man with a body but no soul. Okay. So Gilgamesh, unlucky for him, of course, he falls in love with a man who has a soul, Enkidu. There is this innocence about him. It's like your aunt who came here yesterday. And I don't know how some people have certain things about them, but it's something that Gilgamesh could see in Enkidu. And he wrestles with him. And he wrestles with him because he's wrestling with himself. And eventually he falls in love with him. And then Enkidu dies. The problem with this particular kind of love is that he's been touched by something you can't find in people. Enkidu has something. You know, you can read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you just won't be him. You can know the Gospels inside out, you're just not Jesus. You can get a PhD in philosophy, you're just not Socrates. You're just a box out of which just noise comes. That's it, you know. And so what he comes to realize is that, you know, I fell in love with someone. He gave me wings. I saw glimpses of something. And you know, you have money, you can go back to life and you can buy yourself a mansion and find various ways to distract yourself, but he didn't want that. And that's one of the problems with being touched with a pain that you find to be enormously valuable. You know, I worked with my own teacher for about 10 years, Hussein. And for the past maybe 20 years, I've been reading books, not very often though, maybe once every 5, 6 years, talking to people. And I've desperately been looking for someone who has something that Hussein had. It's a desert. There is no one out there who can inspire you. I mean, just think about that for a moment. 8 billion people on this fucking planet. No one says anything that's interesting. Everything is plagiarized. No one is creative. And if they're creative, in the shitty way. And that's what Gilgamesh felt. People have beautiful faces, they have ugly souls. They open their mouth, you say, yuck. You know. And so, since no one could nourish him, he just said, you know what? Civilization is no good. Whatever human beings touch, it turns into dust. Maybe I can find what I'm looking for in the desert. Man, in the desert, he found some guy whose name is King Utnapishtim, which in the Sumerian language means he who has found life. That you sit in his presence and something about you comes to life and you don't really know what it is. You have respect, you have honor, you have dignity. It's like you've grown wings, you just don't know where to fly. I mean, some people have those kinds of qualities to them. You look at them, something happens to you. Okay? But Utnapishtim knows something, that you can't give wisdom to anyone. You know. Now that is a pain worth having. And when Gilgamesh comes back to society, he doesn't talk to people. He finds them to be deaf and dumb. He writes his story on a wall. That's it. And that's the tragic part of it, that the human mind and the human heart, they're not good conduits. They're not good canvases to paint or to write or to imprint or engrave anything worth writing on. They forget far too easily. So when you talk about how does one live a life that is not diminished by time, you can live a small life. But let me just say something about living a small life. Going to school, getting a job, getting married, working things out with your companion in a civilized way, having children, being good to your parents, paying your mortgage on time. These are difficult things to do. If you can do them, you have lived a good life. This day and age, if you can just do those basic things, that's like a Jesus Christ of your life. It's beautiful. Okay. Now, is it true that sometimes you hunger for things that are bigger than life? Absolutely. But to pursue things that are bigger than life means you have to walk away from the things you have created. I know today it's fashionable for these teachers on YouTube to come forth and say, oh yeah, you know, your life is shitty, be creative, be an individual. That's a stupid way of doing business with people. You know, the truth is, it's difficult for people to get done with school. It's difficult for people to keep a relationship healthy. It's difficult to be there for your kids. It's difficult to be there for your parents. It's difficult to keep your emotions relatively in harmony and civilized, you know? So when you invite people to do things that are beyond the ordinary or the basics of life, you're kind of creating this deceptive narrative for them. And eventually, not only will they not have any wings that will carry them to the heavens, they won't even have anything down here either. I mean, look at what happened to the hippies in the 1960s. Look at the concept of free love. They're all around Oakland with AIDS. Free love. All these fantasies, they're ridiculous, you know. So I think there's a stage, okay? Watch romantic movies, want to go out and have a romantic relationship, do it well. Get married to the guy you're in love with, have children with him, go to school, buy a house, buy a car, send your kids to a good school, Then one day you look yourself in the mirror and the mirror will say, your life is not enough. But you've done the basics of life. All the things that people want to do but can't, you have the privilege of doing them, completing them. And after graduation, you say, okay, it's not enough. Now what? Well, now you can read the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now you can read the Gospels. Now you can read the Quran. Now you can read the Dhammapada. Now you can go to India, look for gurus, I suppose, if that's your path. And when you get there, you're not going to think about living a memorable or eternal life, that once you're dead, you will continue to live in the hearts and minds of people. What will happen, at least this is how my experience is, and forgive me for projecting it, is that like anything else, teaching comes with its own set of fantasies. That you're there, you can do this, you can do that. Time will say, you can't do shit for anyone. And even if you can, it's short-lived. They have to do the work. And they can't do the work if they don't have a support system. I mean, you can be sober for one day, but if you want to be just completely sober, you need a community of people who can help you. Okay? Now, knowing, going back to Matt's question about children, I've been a kid. Life is distracting, man. My kids will forget me. That's how things are. Will that piss me off? Absolutely. Do I seek revenge? Yeah. The only thing I can do is when Cassie, who does the videos and the audios, called one day and said, Amir, do you want me to create a channel for you? I said, well, channel for me? No. We come from a tradition where you remain invisible. Invisible. But I said, it wouldn't be bad for my kids after they have messed up their life. They say, oh, well, I wonder what if that guy who called himself our dad, if he had anything to say about anything. They can Google the name, all these videos come up or audios, and they can listen. So, and I did that for a couple of reasons. Very much like what you said. I don't have a big life. I haven't done anything with my life to be memorable. Very much like Abraham. Abraham feared death in the Old Testament. He said to God, give me an eternal life. God said, no. I'm not going to give you eternal life. You suck. I'll do something better though. I'll give you Sarah, then I'll give you Hagar. Why not just live through your kids? But if you want to live through your kids, make sure you leave a positive impression. Don't hit them. Don't scream at them. Take them out for frozen yogurt. Show them kindness, forgiveness, generosity. That's the only way human beings can live an eternal life, through their children. And then if you have left an impression, then your kids will tell their own kids. And they say, oh, here's a picture of my dad. That's how you live. And there's a good amount of humility in that, in the sense that I'm not Mahatma Gandhi. I'm not Jesus Christ. I'm not Socrates. I don't have those capabilities. And if they had any talents, I don't know where those talents came from. I don't have them. My life is cheap, hollow, and for the most part, quite empty. The best I can do is live relatively memorable for my kids. I think we live in a culture where there are too many magical people, at least pretend to be out there, and we want to be like them. It's one of those facades or mirages in our culture today, So, I think before flying, learn how to walk really, really well. C.J. Anderson was one of my students who got picked up by a couple of NFL teams. every time he contacts me just to say hello, and every time he used to come by, the first thing I would ask is, what are you doing with your money? He says, well, I have these people in my life, and I bought a house for this person, I bought a car for this. Just learn how to manage the basic things first. And then if you want to pursue philosophy and become a Socrates, well, give it a try. If you have the talent, well, it'll happen. Anyone else before? What time is it? Oh, 10:04. We have some time. Amaya? Anything? Anyone else?
Talk about the trap people get stuck in when they hold on to grief longer than needed, like grief and love.
First of all, grief is a very, very, very natural part of life. Because as a sort of lonely, strange, pathetic animals that we are, we have no choice but to desire friendships, companionships. We have no choice but to love the people who gave birth to us, held our hands. Those are natural. So when they betray us, we grieve. When they die, we grieve some more. When we form relationships and they don't work out, we grieve some more. And all these relationships, what they have in common is that you have to invest time in them, energy in them. You inject fantasies and hopes and dreams in them. You look at them way in the future, that in 10 years' time, my father ABCD or my kids EFGH. So it's a natural part of life. If you don't grieve, there is something definitely wrong with you. You must also be able to grieve the fact that time is lost, youth is lost, vitality is lost, vigor is lost, okay? So we grieve in all sorts of different ways. Is there a timetable? No. Does the culture encourage people to hold on to grief longer than they ought to? Absolutely. If there is not, or there are not enough distractions in your life where you have to pick yourself up and just do the work, and you have a good amount of leisure time where your mind is just going to play and replay the same old narratives over and over again, we are no longer talking about grief, we're talking about becoming addicted to a certain kind of narrative. I don't know if you've ever talked to depressed people who've been chronically depressed. They choose their friendships very, very carefully, perhaps without them knowing, that they choose people who are broken. With broken people, they talk about broken stories. And this continues over and over. I will take 5 minutes telling you my story, and then you take 5 minutes. And then we have like a 10-hour conversation. And then when our jaws are exhausted, you say, okay, and then you go to bed, lay your head down and go to sleep because it's too much now. Okay. So, and if you're talking about your brokenness to healthy people, initially healthy people assume that they can help until they mature and realize, well, no one can help anyone. You just have to, kind of like what Morpheus tells Neo, teachers can help. The only thing teachers can do is create a space. And in that space, that becomes a training ground. You're pushed, you're pulled, and eventually, hopefully, you'll learn a few things. And once you learn, you understand. And once you understand, you can apply. Okay? The other aspect of hanging out with people who don't have the sort of brokenness that we do is they don't really care for your story after a while. I mean, sure, I can go out with you and you can tell me about what your ABCD did to you. I mean, sure, we're in a relationship. I love you, you love me. The first couple of months is fine. The third month, when I come home and the dishes are not done, there's no food after coming home from 12-hour shift. I don't give a fuck about your parents or your past, about the white man, black man, blue man. It's your life and my life together, man. I want to be in this house with you in a healthy way. And after a while, I just give up. So I cease to be compassionate towards you and begin to be compassionate towards me. Okay? Let me just end class with this, because I don't really have an answer to your question, but I'll tell it to you in this way. And forgive me, those of you who've been in my classes, you know the story well. 30 some odd years ago, I was sitting having my Subway sandwich and the phone rings, and it's my friend who says, my son died, 17 years old. Okay? He goes to pick him up from the basketball court, dies in the car. And so in our culture, 5 people go to the mortuary and you wash this body naked on this white plastic bed. So we wash it. Now the father is very stoic. His arms were folded, leaning against a tree. His son is being put in the ground. The mother, it's a different story, screaming, wailing, hitting herself. She didn't open the blinds for many, many, many weeks. She didn't see anyone. She would call once in a while and say, Amir, do you have like anything I can listen to? I lived in Roseville, they lived in Elk Grove. It's like a 40-minute drive without traffic. So I would drive there, knock on the door. Are you here? You just called me. She didn't open. I would leave the stuff behind the closed door and just drive back. And then she would call me like after 2 weeks saying, by the way, I'm really sorry for not opening the door. I just hate people. Okay, understandable. Their doors and their blinds were shut for many, 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 many weeks and months. And Persians do their business with their kids slightly different. I mean, Middle Easterners and Africans and, you know, that especially for mothers, their kids are the very center of the universe. There is nothing out there except their kids. Right? So if my mom doesn't call me like 50 times a day, she's not going to be happy. If I don't pick up every 50 times, she'll be miserable. And she's got 3 kids. So 3 times 50 is 150 times. Okay? And we all have no choice but to pick up the phone. Okay? Now, I suppose if she was in this class way back then asking, how does one overcome grief? Who the hell knows? There came a point, though, she opened the blind. There came a point, she opened the door and went for a walk in the street. There came a time where she said, we're going to have a gathering at our house. Okay. Now, here's a funny thing. My brother's wife, her name is Behrang. The son that she lost, his name was Behrang. So every time we gather, and we don't do it often anymore because right now they moved to Los Angeles. Every time in our gatherings, my brother's wife's name was called out. You would see her face, and all of a sudden the expression would change. It would remind her of something. So some trigger points will never, ever, ever be deleted. Okay? But the point I'm trying to make, depending on the relationship, depending on the intensity of the relationship, the intimacy of it, the history of it, the narrative of it, it has its own timetable. You can grieve with acceptance, or you can grieve with anger. I go to my office every morning. I'm there now about 4:30 now. I write. And in the back of my mind, there's always this feeling of death. And I've been in this business for a long time, so it's always been around. I accept the fact, should I have a stroke in my office and die, my writing will remain incomplete. That's fine. Maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't feel this way. I would have this like urgency to me. I need to write and write and write and finish it up. I accept the fact that I'm going to leave a number of things unfinished, and that's okay. So you could be grieving, but you understand the grief, how it came about, what happened, and accept it. And live with it in a very, very, very comfortable, creative way. Does it sometimes create sorrow? Absolutely. If you're talented enough, and you are, because you play music, if you're talented enough, you can express that sorrow through playing the guitar. And since you're going to school for philosophy, find books. Kierkegaard, depressed guy. He wrote really, really well. Plato, depressed. I mean, he saw his teacher die. He wrote. Malcolm X, I mean, talk about a violent life. Somehow he recovered. And when you see your people suffering on a daily basis, that's a lot of grief to be carried by one person. But you express it through giving sermons, talking to people. So there is no reason for anyone to overcome grief. In fact, it's bad. It's a source of inspiration. It makes you think and reflect. And it pushes the world and all the distractions out. But you just have to find a way to, approach it creatively. And that usually takes time. So, President, anything? Sure? صد فصل بهار آمد و بیرون ننهم گام ترسم که بیایی تو و در خانه نباشم. It's a line by Vahshi Bafqi that many seasons come and go, but I never leave my house because I'm afraid that while out you may knock on my door and I don't open and I'll miss you. If you're able to sit with grief and be a good host to it, and sometimes, you can be a good host, that's understandable. If you can be a good host and just live with grief, one of those days, grief is like a mansion. It's going to open a door, invite you to one of the houses or rooms it has inside and says, this is the gift of you struggling and surviving 20 years of grief. And in that room, you will find so many valuable gems. You just can't leave the house. Sometimes it's too much, and I know people need to escape, and it's a good thing. But, when you're done being worn out, you've rested a little, go back to it. Nothing wrong with that. And I think if you like Buddhism, the first noble truth, which is life is nothing but this continuous stream of suffering, it means that you have no choice but to be in a grieving mode all the time. Learn how to live with it. Life is one loss after another. It's a beautiful philosophy of life. You don't have to physically divorce your wife, but there will come a time where emotionally you're divorced. But you knew that. There comes a point where you have nothing to talk about. You knew that. There comes a point where there is nothing to share. You knew that already. And you live with it. Forgive me for all this nonsense. I hope you have a nice weekend. Tell your parents I said hi. Take care. See you next week. By the way, for those of you who want to come to the office, just send me an email. It's okay. Just don't come by. So, have a nice... you can stay. If you have any questions, we can... All right. Thank God. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Maya.
My attendance.
Yes. Yeah, you're fine. Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you.
You're fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
She had doors.
Terry, thank you. You take care, man. You too.
Hospital,